Ted, I'm recording another presentation again where you explained that the curriculum was derived from Latin word for a running track.
Oh yes.
And that
Racetrack.
one of the mistakes we make is by putting our students on a running track. And one of the things we pride ourselves here at Southampton is that actually, as researchers, we are learners. We have inquiring minds. And it seems to me that your story was about learners and the trails that you were following through. And what I'd like to see is that we use, what you seem to be proposing is that we use that inquiring mind and that we follow those trails, and that you seem to be having a manifesto for people to have inquiring minds, and I think that can only be an excellent thing. And I think it's probably what we try and do with our students right here.
Mike.
Isn't what people find really interesting is the narrative that human beings make of all the different parts. So you've presented something, and it's something about you and your personality that comes through by the things you choose and the way you put them together. And therefore, people finding things themselves is interesting, but what's more interesting is finding out how other people make these connections. And
Both should be options. Both should be options.
Yeah, definitely, but you need a lot of listening and discovering other people's narratives of the world and how they perceive the world. Kids finding out about adults and way they see things before they can come to their own interpretation. So you need both.
As I see education today, it is so much about boredom and resentment that now everywhere I understand that throughout Europe, dropout rates are growing as never before, particularly among the males, because there is no way to express initiative for a male in high school except by drugs, sex, and fighting. And in the 13th century, they'd be out working by that age, but we park them in this place where they've got to sit in a class listening to some boring teacher. Now, they don't have, if the same thing can be accomplished without boredom, then by all means, let's do it.
The point where they're bored is if that teacher could be replaced by any other teacher and they would deliver exactly the same story, it's boring.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that person's view of the thing.
Sometimes. Only sometimes.
Some people are great teachers. So Joyce, and your hand, and then Lillian again. Joyce.
I just wondered if eating one cigarette made you give up smoking for a year, could you not have tried eating 10?
Don't work like that.
That's because you wanted it to work like that.
I don't think it would work. It's bad enough for a year, but after that, the urge comes on me.
You might get to like it. Hi, I'm Lawrence. I'm always impressed with the things you come out with. That's actually been serious damage for my life. It's been reading up on your ideas thinking, that's
Sorry.
a good idea. But one of the things that you talk about, and you have all the time, is the problem with linearity. It's really this hypertext discussion. If you've got a hypertext as you have them, as you showed on the screens at the Xanadu space, I'm really pleased to see it.
Thank you.
How do you teach people, or how do you allow people to make good maps like that, good Xanadu spaces? Because it strikes me that that's the really important thing. It's probably the hardest thing to do.
I think it's just going to be everybody for themselves. But if you see a good example, you'll imitate. Now, here, by the way, is the example I usually use. I have a history book at home on the occupation of France during World War II. Very straightforward history book, very good. So it's got preface, introduction, first chapter, and then after that, government, arts, economy, etc. Each a separate chapter of what's happening, what happened in France during World War II. those chapters are published in sequence, but in fact they are parallel. And they ought to be represented in parallel. And showing people good examples of these things, I think, should go far. But remember, people will always want to tart it up and do strange things, and so there'll be the clash between good stuff and bad stuff, as anywhere else.
It's more of a comment than a question on the previous debate. I really liked the example about the expanding Earth. You know, that you can take the same facts and you can come up with what is not an equally valid hypothesis, but as a starting point, an equally valid hypothesis. You know, the continents aren't moving apart, the Earth is getting bigger. It's wonderful. And I'm thinking about your education, that your evidence is that modern educational methods don't work because the children are bored and resentful. But you could equally well say that's because children haven't learned that education is more fun than work. So abandon anti-linearity and send them out to work in rough jobs for about 25 years until they're really fed up and they'll learn like crazy. That's my hypothesis.
Excellent suggestion.
Do you enjoy novels? They seem
I have trouble reading fiction.
the art of sequence.
Yeah. No, it's I don't have time. Yeah.
But you like films?
Yeah. Yeah, because they're short. You know, you can predict how long it will take, and it's over.
They're very linear.
And, well, some of them, but less so. I mean, look at Pulp Fiction and Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question, Ted. Okay, you've seen a lot of changes in computing over the last, God knows how many years.
No.
And
Haven't changed a bit.
well, you've seen it, and you've had an influence on it. If you had a time machine, you could go back and change one decision that you made. What would it be?
Oh.
It involves naming people that I can't name.
Tell me later then.
Yeah. Also making the type of computer live much bigger. And dividing it into 2 volumes.
Well, I think we've interrogated Ted enough. I've asked Hugh, who's another person who's been influenced heavily by Ted's work to get in his career in high tech, to give the vote of thanks.